before I continue, I've had some great conversations with some folks as they were coming in a few. And I just want to acknowledge them, especially our conversations about cultural, and historical preservation. Who is here that graduated from Dallas High School or Trojan Tech? Please stand up. So, it was great to speak with you about this building and what it meant to you, and the stories of traveling here and connecting you to your home in West Dallas or where you resided. And that is what makes the city, right? Is who we are, our cultural heritage. So thank y'all for being here tonight. And I want to thank Preservation Dallas and Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation for being our hosts. My name is Brent Brown. I'm an architect, and I will send you to your programs for bios and things like that. But I'm going to make one correction. I am no longer the CEO of the Trinity Park Conservancy. I actually left 4 years ago. And I will send you to Tony Moore with any questions you may have about their work. So I have the pleasure of making introductions and making a few remarks, but most importantly tonight, my role, I serve as the co-chair of the City of Dallas Historic and Culture Preservation Strategic Plan, along with Amber Sims and our advisory committee, advising staff with HR&A as our consultant lead. For the past year, there's been conversations about how do we move into the next half century of preservation in Dallas. I think very importantly, we need to acknowledge last year was 50 years since the original ordinances of preservation began in our municipal government. And so what does the next half century look like, right? And I think putting forward from that work of that committee and with staff, and T.C. Broadnax, who will be joining us, just as an FYI, we think the council has concluded their meeting today. And so our council members and city manager will be joining us here as they can get here, as they've been debating the bond program. So what I wanted to bring forward first in my remarks was, Dallas has had a narrative of the city on the prairie. James Pratt, who's a mentor of mine, he wrote a book, The Prairie's Yield. There's been a long narrative of Dallas being a made city, right? A city of commerce, a thing that really wasn't supposed to be here. Well, that narrative hasn't included all the stories and histories that have made Dallas. We know history are the stories that often get told, but what stories get told, right, are not always inclusive. And that's just the truth, whether we like it or not. We have a rich heritage related to preservation, significant historic districts. This building right here is an example that was saved from a bulldozer, not only due to the act of preservationists, but also to proactive developers who said we can save it, right, when the time was right. And so how do we position historic preservation and culture as an equal building block in the future of Dallas? We talk about transportation, we talk about jobs, we talk about housing, right? These things are important. Well, thanks to the leadership of our city manager, he has put forward first and center that following the adoption of the Racial Equity Plan in 22, the Economic Development Policy, Equitable Economic Development Policy in 23, also with the housing policy in 23, that we needed a new strategic plan for historic and cultural preservation that would push these activities forward in an equal way. At the same time, whatever that work is in the future, it must be equitable. It must be inclusive, and it must grow the story of Dallas to be shared with all of the communities, which means a citywide approach that is open to acknowledging when we weren't doing a good job, while we try to do a better job. So, in closing, I just kind of ask a couple of questions, right? Can we envision a future where our city's diverse histories and cultures are evident, protected, and celebrated? They're just right in front of us. And that wherever we live, we It's not that we all have to, be our own history sleuths, so to speak, right? That it's right in front of us. Can we aspire to enrich the lives of today's residents by embracing our history and culture of every community? Can we do it? And lastly, can we envision a city where the future development, when people go build things, right? When they go and buy a piece of property, they respect the place. They don't just try to change the name. Does it mean that we can recognize and respond to our past? Can we preserve history? And it's non-negotiable. It's when you arrive in a place, respect its past and celebrate. And so I've enjoyed this last year, and tonight is a moment where we begin a process of that plan starting to come forward for more discussion. And we have a great panel tonight. And so quickly, I'll just thank them for being here, and just to introduce each of them to you, starting on my far right, Amber Simmons, founder of racial justice organization Young Leaders, Strong City. Next, Rosemary Hinojosa, who has been a strong advocate and leader preserving Dallas's Mexican-American heritage and community, and is also in our Dallas Landmark Commission. Next, yes. You know what? You have to have supporters if you're going to do this work. Absolutely. Next, Marcel Quimby, an architect, preservationist, and not only in the Dallas area, but across our state with decades of experience. And then as T.C. Broadnax, who will be joining us, and when he comes in, we'll usher him up. And our moderator, Sylvia Kamatsu, we know your voice, and not just when you're asking for money. But behind the scenes, you are the Chief Content Officer at our beloved KUO. And you're working on a new video series with Dallas Truth and Racial Healing and Transformation on the history of race and racism in the Dallas area. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia.
All right. Thank you, Brent, for sharing a framework for our discussion tonight. Thank you for the introductions. And I'd also just like to add my welcome to each of you. It's great to see this terrific turnout tonight for such an important topic. And I note that we will be inviting your questions for the panel in just a bit. So be thinking about what you'd like to ask. But right now, let's dive right in and let's provide some more context for what the long-term impact and the consequences have been because of past and current policies and programs around preservation, historic and cultural preservation. Amber, how has that system shaped the Dallas that we see and we walk around in and we live in today?
Hi everyone, good evening. Thrilled to be here. Also want to take time and thank you Sylvia and thank you everyone for being here tonight to acknowledge the fact that Dallas is a place that was built on stolen land. We acknowledge that Dallas was built on the indigenous territories of a number of tribes who were wrongfully and forcefully removed from their home territory. With thousands of years of background being here and who created whatever we call this place today, right? But also acknowledging that Dallas was built with stolen labor. What that means is that the labor of enslaved people who were brought from Africa with their talents and with their brilliance, forced to work for free. And then that free labor has continued in the practices that we have today and how we unequitably pay people. Okay? Starting there. And acknowledging that as someone who has grown up in Dallas, but then also my family is from Birmingham, Alabama, I've always just had like a curiosity about place and the history that is in Birmingham, for example. Around the civil rights movement, and being here in Dallas and being like, you would think that there wasn't a civil rights movement here. And a bad assumption like that about what Dallas is can force us to make a lot of bad assumptions about a place in which we live. And so a lot of what I think about in walking around is thinking about not necessarily what we see, but what we don't see in terms of history. And why don't we see those things? And that's where we get narratives around, and we'll talk more about this. I wrote about the first high school in Dallas, which is not where Booker T. Washington is currently. It was on the other side of 75, and it was called Dallas Colored High School, and then turned into the FDRL. And there's so many places like that are missing, but if we start with that inquisitiveness around what was here, because there were whole communities here. There are people who were here before us and beginning to fill in those blanks. I think then we begin to create a pathway towards a more equitable and inclusive future that includes people that look like me. The histories of Black and brown people throughout.
Rosemary, you've been so active working with communities at West Dallas, with other spaces as well. What do you think are some of the lessons learned from how we have carried out, past preservation efforts?
Well, we, kind of following up on what Amber said, we want to also state that, or I want to state on behalf of the Mexican American community, that we have not been acknowledged, we have not been honored and appreciated for what we have contributed to Dallas. Many of our community members in the early days started coming around the Mexican Revolution, although we were here way before then, just like we said, indigenous people, and we're part of the indigenous area too. And yet, it's not until maybe the early 2000s that we start acknowledging, honoring, and appreciating the contributions as far as historic preservation goes. We have only, out of about 100 plus landmarks and structures in Dallas, only 4 are related to the Mexican American experience. So that's kind of tells you a little bit about where we have been as a city, that we need to really up our game if we want to show that acknowledgement, honor, and appreciation of a whole community that actually, from our labor, contributed to the building of Dallas, to the city. So there's a lot that we still have to do. There's some things that have been done, but a lot that we still have to do.
And Marcel, you've served on so many boards, commissions, headed up significant preservation projects. As you're listening to Amber and Rosemary, what are your thoughts about what the long-term consequences have been about how preservation has been carried out?
Well, first, thanks to Brent. Thanks to Brent for bringing up the 50-year anniversary of the Dallas Historic Ordinance, because that established. Okay, thanks for bringing up the 50-year anniversary, because that established for the first time the ability of neighborhoods and property owners to self-identify and what they wanted to do with their property. If they wanted, as a neighborhood, to get together and designate the neighborhood as a historic neighborhood, they could. Some of the early ones were 10th Street, Swiss Avenue, Munger. And, at the time they did that, East Dallas did not look like what it looks like now. Those were derelict areas of town, and historic preservation, being designated as a historic preservation, a historic neighborhood, brought some stability to, areas that were outside the boundaries. Because the neighbors got together, they decided that they wanted, their neighborhood to remain in place. They didn't want those buildings torn down. That's really what the landmark designation does for you. And it cements that the history is out there for people to know. And there were always efforts to landmark, inner city areas. Some were African American, some were Hispanic. And that's been a priority of the district now, of the process. Could it be better? Yes. But some of the challenges with designation is you've got to have under consent. You've got to own the property, and you've got to say yes. I mean, there have been a number of neighborhoods that have gone to the bat and, you know, to become a historic district, and they've not been able to because they didn't have a majority of the votes of the, you know, from property owners within the neighborhood. And that's really, really unfortunate. And I would like to just summarize you know, what historic preservation has done, the ordinance, and landmarking buildings and districts, is that those buildings are still here. You know, and you know, you can just drive anywhere in East Dallas and up Cliff, and you can see what's happening with the super development, you know, condos and apartments everywhere, and we've lost that history. You know, we've got historic districts that are now surrounded by something that's entirely alien to what was there originally. You know, and we don't have a community, and we don't have an ethic here in Dallas where, like Brent said, is, you know, is non-negotiable that this history is important. Both the retention of the history and the retention of the buildings in which you can look at and realize that you've got a history.
I believe we have our city manager coming in, but in the meantime, let's go ahead and talk about some of the specific barriers and challenges you and others are facing right now in the work that you're doing. Amber, could you start us off?
Specifically in terms of barriers, especially for a lot of Black communities, is just the places, the buildings, the physical edifices literally not being there. They were demolished. And so I spoke earlier about B.F. Durrell, which actually, like in my initial article, I said that the school was demolished around 1969. It actually served as a Head Start program for a few years, about 5 years, until it was demolished in the earlier part of the 1970s. And why that's important is because like there was this opportunity to to use this building for something else. And guess who owned the building now? Because it was a school. DISD in the city. Okay? And then it was transferred over to HUD. And then the building, and then that property itself was, I guess, acquired, sold to a private entity. So now we're talking, if you're familiar with Dallas, right across the street from the Roseland public housing, also known as projects. My church, where I grew up and why I was particularly interested in this area is Pilgrim Rest Missionary Baptist Church, which has been there for a long time, which was also moved because of the creation of City Place. Bought office land, sold, and forced to move again. And Pilgrim Rest, where it is off of North Washington, is in a similar position today. Right? Several years later, because it's valuable land and it's being like literally choked out. Okay? And so I'm also saying is like, if we don't know our history and thinking about, what it means to have like policies in place, to say, okay, we're in the middle of Dallas and we're in Uptown. What was this vacant lot before? What was it? And putting some restrictions, because now I don't think that Kroger's going to do anything with that particular land anymore, but it's an area that's no longer affordable. That was once in city-owned public hands, okay? But then also just like around what's valuable. So this high school, right, where we are today, was considered valuable. It's also based on the fact that Black people didn't attend this school. I'm just gonna be honest. And just quite intrinsically places that Black and people of color inhabit are less valuable and less likely to be preserved and have the resources. And then the other things that I want to just like for us to think about is like our own just like personal archival and preservationist techniques that we can use. Is like when we're going through our churches and communities that we're in. Are we preserving pictures? Do we have processes for those things to exist as well, so that we can hand over the stories of what happened, right, when this high school transition from being Dallas High School to becoming Closure Tech? And the preservation story, because we've also got to, as individuals, that's my charge too, for us to do that work around, like, what can we preserve, what can we keep in our own familial archives to make it possible that the story can be told as well.
Yes, Marcel, I can tell you want to weigh in.
You're sitting next to Rosemary, who has done the most fabulous job of preserving.
Marcel?
Okay,
Right over here.
right there. Okay. You're sitting next to Rosemary, who has done, with her cheering crowd, has done the most magnificent job of preserving, collecting, and showcasing the history of Hispanics in Dallas. So you probably ought to talk about that, because you guys have been doing it for a long time and have done an excellent job.
Sure. Yeah.
That Rosemary, you would say though, you run into some barriers along the way.
Yes, we have. First of all, I'd like to go back to something that we discussed the first time around, and that's acknowledgement, honor, and appreciation. So, to me, in my opinion, the Mexican American community here in Dallas is like that kid in school that's not acknowledged, that's forgotten, that's excluded, that may be the last one to be chosen or not chosen at all for a team sport or a student council position. That's the way that, in my opinion, I feel that the Mexican American community has been excluded from the preservation process. But nonetheless, Dallas Mexican American historically trucks on. We've had a lot of barriers. For example, when we were trying to restore the Eagle Ford Elementary School in West Dallas, the first structure in West Dallas that was preserved, it took us about 5 years. We started in about 2012. It was a small group, so it takes a supportive group, it takes a group that's willing to take initiative. But it was a difficult process. If we had the support of one of the landmark commissioners that helped us share the information about how to process a designation application and so forth. We also had the help of the Old Oak Cliff Conservation League that gave us some funds. But the funds were still insufficient, so we had to come out of our own pockets to pay for the application process. We were able to get the work of the skills of Marcel here to help us with that application process, because it's difficult and tough to maneuver through. So that was a barrier. The funding was a barrier. If there was a group of, let's say, Spanish speakers that wanted to preserve a structure or a site, and they were limited English speaking, that would be a barrier because the materials aren't translated. The fact that I'm the only Mexican American on the Landmark Commission, and there's one African American, tells you a lot also, because we're here to support our communities. We're here to help preserve the landmarks, the sites, the districts in our community, of our communities. And in order to do that, you have to have a voice in the decision-making process, like the Landmark Commission or city departments, planning and so forth, that contribute to making the city diverse and whole, to allowing the people in the city, the ones that have been marginalized, that have been excluded, that have been, not honored, to feel that they're part of the city. That's what brings social cohesion. We have cultural assets that we need to recognize. We being those communities of color or marginalized communities, that we have those assets that need to be acknowledged, and we don't often see that. We're beginning to see that now. I'm really hopeful with the city's goal now, trying to bring equity to the process. So I'm hopeful and wish that we see more diversity and preservation in the future.
Well, welcome to our city manager, T.C. Broadnax. We heard you were dealing with the bond issues right before this, so thank you for making time to join us.
Sure, thank you.
We are talking about some of the barriers and challenges. And as the city is seeking input from people like the panel tonight, like the people who are here this evening, what are you saying as the priorities that are coming to the top?
So thank you for the question. And so I just want to level set as it relates to, I'm not sure why I'm even up here with these amazing women, but it's proven that I'm not needed because you actually started without me. So I will fit in where I get in. So let me say this. I think tonight's conversation, the parts that I just walked in on and just listening, is why we're here tonight, quite honestly, and why I think having this conversation, and I think the work that we're trying to do to change the city's lens and perspective on how we treat and view preservation as a subject, and getting and moving away from solely being concerned about, I guess, four walls and roofs and improvements and enhancements on existing structures, but to bring in different layered perspectives around preservation of culture, areas of meaning for people, and just hearing and bringing other individuals into a conversation that typically had left them out of it, except for in cases where it actually impacted the places that they dwell and used to be in. And so, my perspective on this journey of conversation and what we're doing today, and hopefully what you'll see coming out of the many conversations we've had around repositioning our preservation lens, in the spirit of the recent adoptions of many plans that have focused on equity, bringing those things into congruence with our preservation aspects of what we do, because the stories that go untold and or aren't amplified and heard, that go beyond just, say, infrastructure that people care about, I think is important to people and the young people in this community, and bringing them into this conversation. And so tonight, hopefully I just get to hear more so that it enlightens us to work harder and try to develop tools and spaces that allow for the full breadth of recognizing people's stories and histories in this community and elevating preservation more broadly. And hopefully, throughout and because of that conversation, the importance of it, the funding and resources to support doing the work and partnership that we hopefully can enrich and support are stronger. That building program, I think that can be viewed as a best practice, even though we've done some amazing things, so it probably already is, but looking at it differently and getting other cities to do the same and be that leading example. So for us, I think it's always a discussion about resources, and you put your money on what you value, and we need to value much more in the preservation spaces and hear the voices about what's important to value. So that would be my response to that question.
So if we broaden the definition, right, of what is worth preserving, what is worth honoring, what is worth investing in, what do those changes look like? How would a strategic plan that centers inclusion and centers equity, what would it look like? And let's just go ahead and tackle one of the key issues, and that's gentrification. Too often, right, preservation has resulted in the displacement of longtime residents, and displacement is a very, in many ways, cold term to use, right? the trauma that is associated with being forced out of your home, community where you have ties. So how can a new strategic plan be tied to the city's planning for affordable housing, for economic development, for sustainability? What does that look like?
I'd like to share a little bit about that. And some stories, 2 or 3 in particular. In West Dallas, we have, the Mexican American Historical League has identified 18 historic barrios. 2 of them are enclaves, which are smaller little 2 to 3 street neighborhoods. Out of those 18, a lot of them have already disappeared because of gentrification, because of displacement with urban progress, development, etc. In West Dallas, there's 5 and 1 a little ways south of West Dallas towards Silk, what is called Silk 3030. They're really in danger of being erased. And so I remember when I worked in West Dallas, when the Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge was constructed in 2012, I believe, I had a client that was renting a house, small 2-bedroom house, at $350 a month, if I'm correct, or $400 a month. And it was those rentals that the city had to erase, you might say, or push out because of the development coming in. So she was forced to leave the only community that she knew, where the neighbors knew each other, where she volunteered up to 1,000 hours a year at a community center. That family was forced to leave, and they had to move to Oak Cliff. The rent in Oak Cliff was triple what they were paying, which they found very difficult to handle. Thankfully, because there was no affordable housing that they knew of, that they qualified for in West Dallas, they were able to qualify for Habitat for Humanity home, but in Pleasant Grove. So thankfully, they found a new dwelling. But if you multiply her situation times all the others that were forced out, you will have a loss of culture, of identity, of hope in West Dallas. The other story I wanted to mention is the story of Felix Lozada. I don't know how many of you know Felix Lozada. He was an elderly man that lived right there at the base of the Margaret Hunt Hill Bridge. When the developers started swooping in and wanting to purchase the properties, they were offering about $30,000, I guess, for a property. Because they knew, I think the perception was that the residents were low income, lesser educated, and for $30,000, some of them thought, oh my God, this is a miraculous windfall. No, not knowing that there's no way in 2012 that they could buy another home anywhere for $30,000. So that was another part of that failure, I think, of honoring those residents. I remember when we used to go, I used to go and talk with Mr. Lozada, and there was a sign on his fence of his property that said not for sale. He was making sure. He was the leader of the La Bajada Neighborhood Association, and he worked with the city officials at that time to try to negotiate the protection of La Bajada, a neighborhood that he lived in and that the residents were part of. They did have, in the historic overlay, they did have some restrictions for the developers, that they couldn't build higher than 3 stories, they couldn't go beyond the street. Well, that's gone by the wayside. So now you have the big box, 2-story homes that are 500,000 plus, next to a little small, modest, wood frame, 650 square foot home. That's happening all over West Dallas, and so that also leads to desperation, to frustration, to hopelessness. So the city really needs to work with West Dallas especially, and Bishop Arts also in Oak Cliff on those issues. You don't want to see residents displaced, but you need to do something. Oh, and by the way, can I mention one more thing? If we're talking about erasure, La Bajada is what that barrio was called, right? Immediately at the base of the Margaret O'Neill Bridge. That is now called Trinity Groves. So talk about an insult to the people that live in La Bajada. That is insulting, it's not acknowledging, it's not honoring, it's not respecting the culture and the identity.
Right, we erase the identity
Yes,
of communities by
you erase its
erasing
name.
it. Marcel?
And unfortunately, it's not just West Dallas, it's everywhere. I mean, I live in an older area of Dallas, and when I leave my neighborhood in many directions, it's through either streets in which we've lost all the retail, we've lost all the single-story houses, and you've got 3- and 4-story apartments or condos. And then some neighborhoods are like what you're describing. I mean, you've got little house, and a house that's huge. It's 4 times as big as what it replaced. And that's really sad. And so a couple of things that we might want to think about is, working to enable people to remain in their homes. And I don't know if anybody, I don't think there's anybody in the room that has an answer for one aspect of it is the taxes. Because when, development starts happening, the prices that your land is appraised at just goes through the roof. And I know people in my neighborhood that, they bought the house it's paid for, but when the taxes, double in 5 years, and they're on a fixed income, and they're retired, they're not going to be able to remain in those homes for the rest of their lives as they had anticipated because of the taxes. So that's one thing. Also, the City of Dallas does not have any programs that help people figure out how to work on their homes and increase the value of the homes and increase the livability of the historic homes so they can stay in the family can stay in the neighborhood. And that's really an issue because if you don't know enough and no one's teaching you how to repair pipes and how to repair, replace windows or how to repair windows, that can be problematic and the house can deteriorate. And the other thing is, one more topic is education of the history. We all talk about that. There are sometimes, Deep Ellum just went through a survey that the City of Dallas and Preservation Dallas worked on, to figure out, to recommend, to evaluate the neighborhood and recommend what areas are a National Register district, because that's easy to do. Unfortunately, nobody in Ballot is interested in actually having the neighborhood, the commercial area designated, because it would prevent them from tearing down all those buildings, which is unfortunate. I mean, the window for that was probably 30 years ago, and it's gone. But having, the city needs a I think a good recommendation would be a survey that identifies neighborhoods that are historic, that neighborhoods that are culturally historic, properties where something happened, cultural districts, sites that are important culturally. That is a missing piece. And until you know what's there, it can be gone and you don't know about it. And the people who own it may not know about it. So, getting that information, having that survey and that research being done, maybe, there's certain areas of Dallas that you do in a year, and then in a couple of years you come back and do another area. And because people aren't going to protect and be what they have if they don't understand its value. And they may not, so then they think it's, an old house. And it's more than that. It's a part of a very important neighborhood, or you've got an important neighbor next door to it. And that helps people figure out, appreciate what they've got, and then think about what they can do if they want to protect it. But that lack of education and that lack of acknowledging what's there is a major, disincentive.
Before we go to you, Amber, TC, your response to what Marcel just said, a survey to even understand what we've got, we don't have that now. Tax abatement programs to help low-income residents repair their homes. Are those going to be in the strategic plan?
Just want to say this. One, we have programs that provide resources and funding for individuals in historic homes, and we offer tax incentives. I think there's a bigger issue, and I think it was raised particularly around the impacts of the development that's adjacent and right next to some of those structures in neighborhoods, and I've seen them too, and it's really out of character and scale. I think that pressure, I think council has heard, and they feel that every budget season as we talk about taxes and economic development, and I think we've actually advanced proposed legislation at the state level trying to deal with ways to shield individuals that are being impacted by new development in their neighborhoods. I think the bigger issue that I would see beyond the taxes, and I understand that, and I think gentrification, that's a real fear, and it's actually happening. But you have to understand that this conversation is based on our understanding of that, but I'd say this, and I don't take it the wrong way. That is the Dallas way. Our focus, as always and continually, is on building new things and putting value on the ground to increase the tax base, obviously. But people believe it's easier to start from scratch, which if you are a student of preservation, it's not environmentally more friendly. It's not a job multiplier of people with skills that touch and do masonry and do the things that, you have gone to school and or many of the working class people in our community do. I think, again, that is the reason why I think we paused and wanted to have a different type of conversation and evolve our preservation lens. One where preservation is not seen as a punitive thing. You commented on businesses and even residents in some cases don't want to be in districts that are historically designated or in a landmark property because they believe it's going to cost them more to do anything, and they have to deal with somebody telling them what they can and cannot do to their own property. So I think it's instinctive that they run away from it. I think even the notion of rolling out and having programs that allow for and work with our partners in the preservation community about not having to, if you are going to demolish a structure, what can be saved in it to then actually either stay in place and or be put back in any other structure in any great way. I think the evolution of our thinking on it, it has to shift. Even over at our municipal building where we do permitting, again, there's so much pressure on folk want to do new things and build new things, and so there's a rush. You never think about what it's doing to a community. I would say this, our policies, and it was daylighted to me, and I'm not new here anymore, but where it hit me that something wasn't quite right as usual was the discussion around a policy that the city actually adopted itself to expedite the demolition in historic areas for properties that were a certain size. And I say size in that statement because there was some intentionality in that, maybe innocent or not, that it was a 1,500 square foot barrier, where it's places where there were more and larger, in more well-to-do areas, larger historic homes, they weren't impacted. And so, again, we stopped doing that as a practice, even though it was allowed. But secondly, and I'll add this and I'll be quiet because I can go on for days on this, is the whole demolition by neglect strategy that is deployed. That I think folk know very well what they're doing. And code enforcement obviously has to continually do their job, But I think as a city, we got to position ourselves to understand what's going on in that regard. Start talking about receivership. Start talking about other things that don't allow people to just watch a property decay and then come in and do what you see, and that's offering you small resources for your property because they let it, if you're renting it, go into disrepair. And so this whole system, I won't say it's rigged because that sounds too familiar, but I'd say that is the very reason I wanted to have this conversation. Again, I spent time in San Antonio where this type of preservation aggressiveness, to the extent that it's all hands on deck and it is really resource driven around sharing and teaching and partnering with folks to teach people how to manage within districts and actually do things that celebrate historic districts and areas and cultures and other things like that. That wasn't where they were in 2006 and 7, but they're there now because, again, point of emphasis that happened to be in my portfolio as an assistant city manager. So I appreciate and understand preservation, and I've seen some of the best do it. And so that's what I want and hope for us, is that we can take on and begin to do similar things that other more progressive cities are doing when it comes to preservation, to reframe the conversation that says development is good, but preservation is equally as good, if not better, and adaptive reuse and other things like that. We need to get better at doing that and stop rewarding the destruction of communities for the sake of resources and ease, and not make it a weapon, but really stand up. And I saw it when and I'm gonna stop with this. When I think, even when I was in Tacoma, and I've been a lot of places, I'm not a carpetbagger, but when there was a 1910 church, like some of our historic churches here, that was being sold when I first got there by the church because they couldn't afford to keep it up anymore. And they were actually, the new buyer was actually going to tear it down. And I was just looking around like, huh? Coming from San Antonio, I was like, that would never happen. It was just weird to me that that was the answer. And so again, I think positioning the many people that are in this room who are advocates for preservation, being willing to change how we've always done it. Doesn't mean we're not going to continue to do some of the things we've always done, but to take the next step to begin to evolve like the capitalistic society we're in has evolved. We've got to move in lockstep to just preserve, or pretty soon we'll be any old city in America with no history and culture to remember. And so again, I think from a city perspective, that's why we're trying to elevate our game, at least from my perspective. You don't have to call it my vision, because I think I've got a lot of allies, but it's really about, let's just change what we're doing. It's worked, but we can do so much more. And I'm committed as a city manager. I know resources are tight in the city, but this is an important issue, and we need to fund it. We need to fund staff to support and do things. We need to allocate resources to support surveys and other types of things, and just get out of our comfort zone and not just process certificates of appropriateness and just move on. We've got to do more than that if we want to save stories to tell people about and allow them to see the richness that this community has had. And I think we do that through preservation. So I'm all in to figuring out and listening, but we just can't keep doing what we've been doing and expect things to change. That's all I'm saying.
Amber, I want to go to you before we open up for questions to the audience, but I do feel, TC, I should share that I'm talking with some residents in the 10th Street Historic District and Thicket in preparation for this conversation. It's important to note that they certainly feel any progress, changes that were made with zoning codes and regulations were because of community protest and pressure, not because of the mission to the city, sharing what I heard. And also that while there are tax programs in place, there are home repair programs in place, there incredibly difficult to navigate. People can't afford attorneys to help them through this process. So before going to Amber, what can be done to make these more accessible to real people?
Thank you for that. So, and I did not mean by any means to say that the struggle and protest or folk having to come out and raise their hand and get upset about what's going on in the neighborhood was not the reason that many of those changes occurred. I would say this. It actually was because of that, and the councilwoman in the district, if we're talking about 10th Street, that saw what was going on and came to me and said, how can we not do that, even though we have the legal right to do it? And as the city manager, I chose to share with my team, we were going to stop bringing forward items that allow for that to happen and figure out how to do it. And that hadn't been said or done before until the councilwoman raised it with me. And so I would say that it's really to her credit that she came to me and asked me to step in and figure out what we could do. So I would say that. Secondly, you're right, when it comes to the processes, in some cases they are cumbersome. What we have done, at least to try to assist, and I think folks probably, hopefully appreciate this, many of the properties in some of these areas, particularly in the underserved areas, are often passed down generationally. And so the titles associated with the ownership of them, as parents leave it to siblings or brothers or sisters, cousins or whoever is now residing in the home, when it comes to the city's involvement with them as it relates to our resources, the challenges are just having clear title or getting families to agree on things. And I will tell you, in certain communities, some of our programs require that the city be placed as a lien participant on some of those properties if we're expending money on them. And in many communities, they're fearful of having government on their title because some of them have had bad experiences where they feel like the government then will come and take my house for any infraction and then I don't have the legal means to defend it. So we've actually deployed and actually funded in on 10th Street at the councilwoman's discretion a clear title program where if you ask us, we will hire attorneys to help you trying to clear the clouds on your title and help streamline and work with families to walk them through things. And so we've tried and we're trying, but again, since most of it is income-based and or the title has to be in a position where we know who to hold accountable for the resources we want to spend, then I think that's the challenging part. But that comes back to reminding myself of San Antonio, where whether we could do it or not, we would enlist preservation partners that had a better approach and or even had resources that could actually assist. We went out and helped paint homes, we donated paint and or even improvements that we could go in and work with individuals in their homes. And so there are different strategies and tools, quite honestly. We haven't been able to do that or haven't been willing to do it or be able to afford it, and or our focus, quite honestly, with our small preservation staff is just doing the administrative processes of keeping things going forward. And that's been our Achilles heel, or being reduced in staffing when budget cuts come around. And so again, I'd say, again, that's the purpose of these conversations, and if more voices speak to what's important, we'll continue to try to layer on programs and resources to meet the needs that you can identify for us that are barriers to people doing things. But again, we're just processing paperwork and trying to make sure people don't demolish structures that they don't have a right to. But we have not had an offensive approach to advancing the cause of preservation more so than trying to survey things every few years. And it's great to tell us, to show where they are, but then if you just watch them fade away, it's just, you're able to talk about what's there. And I hear from Councilmember Ackers all the time, he talks about what Uptown used to be and what all these other places used to be. But again, that is just the energy around Dallas. You listen to our council members, we talk all the time about we need economic development. And I've said it all along, the future of the city from an economic standpoint is Southern Dallas, I believe. And so the struggle will be and the challenge will be how to avoid mass displacement and gentrification and all the things that folk in South Dallas and West Dallas, for that matter, have been asking for years as just basic necessities. When they finally show up, they don't have to drive across I-30 going north to get those things. When they finally show up in those spaces and places, how am I going to ensure that they are actually still there to benefit from the things that they've been asking for 30 and 40 years? That is our quest and what our struggle is, and that's what we've got to be fighting for. And I think these conversations around preservation start that to say, this is what's important. So how do you do all those other things? But let Ms. Jones still live there. Help her keep her house from falling down so that generations can live there for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And don't let someone come in and buy it because they just can't afford to keep it up. And so that's what we've got to mobilize and figure out how to do through systems changes in our city. And that's what the preservation plan will set forth for us to go out and try to figure out how to do. But we need your voices and your ideas and thoughts and your willingness to work side by side.
So Amber, let's hear your response to the discussion so far, then we will go to your questions.
Before we go to the audience for questions, I wanted us, just to consider the possibility of this moment, but also the innovation and imagination that exists here and plug into that. I get really excited about these conversations. I'm someone who's really interested in history from here and think about what is possible. As someone who is committed to living in Dallas, who lives in the South Oak Cliff neighborhood now, which my home is coming up on 60 years old, and so I'm in a neighborhood, which is South Oak Cliff, that is on the brink of becoming a historical district. And what does that mean? But it's also, when I walk my dog down the street, it's also a neighborhood where, I'm calling 311 every other day because there's trash, because I can't walk down the sidewalk. And these are the everyday steps in which a neighborhood becomes disinvested in that then leads, right, to buildings that are considered decrepit and folks moving out. But also, with that being said, it's an amazing opportunity to think about the city who owns so much property. Also to bring Dallas ISD into this, who owns so much property, and historical buildings, okay? So it's not just the ISD too. And also thinking about DART. And the really helpful thing about this, right, is these are all public entities that answer to us. In theory, right? But for real. And so what is our role? And as someone that does, I'm trying to catalog all of starting with the Black and then going to the brown historical schools in Dallas, throughout creating a map, and then going through that is realizing that Dallas ISD owns so much property, they don't have an archival or they don't have a history book, department with Dallas. They don't have an archives department with Dallas ISD. What? They told me okay, anyway, and so there's an area of opportunity that the city can lead to bringing other entities in and thinking about DART, who also owns property, but then also very small things into that, how do we recognize just individual homes on a city basis that are historical? When I was in Birmingham recently, a lot of the homes have little plaques on the patio, on the home itself. And that's something that the city could enlist upon to begin this conversation around reframing what is valuable, but also to take all of the steps that it ordinarily takes for us to go through the process of working with the state and blah, 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 right? But then a lot of places have been torn down because of the freeways, highways. And the city has to enter into that conversation. We're actively still losing churches, still losing Black and brown communities. And where will we come? This is going to be good because it's, we can get to places, new roads, new freeways, but it's also taking away very important elements in our community. And speaking to TxDOT. And then finally, I want to, I just want us to think about narrative change and what becomes possible, and leave us with just 2 stories. I wrote my article that was in the Dallas Morning News on the history of Dallas Colored High School. A woman wrote me back, I didn't believe it. She sent me an email and said, "Hi Amber, my name is Pearl Etta McVeigh and I'm 101 years old." She's 102 now. And she lived in the Mill City neighborhood. And she grew up there. And she went to Julius E. Frazier Elementary School when it first opened in 1930. And she wanted to tell me, and she did tell me about her brother that went to Colored High School. She went to Booker T. Washington, and all of these rich stories. What I'm trying to say, you all, is that people are still living, that have witnessed the history and who have lived through integration, and as coming back segregated again, and what does it mean to catalog Miss Pearl's story and that of others similar. The second thing that I'll say is, there's Miss Wanda Weston. Hey, Miss Wanda. Raise your hand. Her and her husband, Dr. Weston, are the owners of White Rock Chapel. They bought it when it was in receivership in the town of Addison. Under the risk, you all, right, of being bought by private developers who wanted to do nothing more than turn this church that was built by formerly enslaved people on land that was then granted to them by the Knoll family into more homes. They bought it in receivership and are, fighting the good fight in far North Dallas to say that this place matters and we are going to invest in that. That's also, right, under the duress of people actively saying, we do not care about the history of this place, we want $1 million homes. And I know that that's in the town of Addison, but there are ways in which those of us that are doing preservation work are up against big machines. And yet this room is packed today, so I'm also very hopeful and optimistic about what it means when we put policies and practices into place and stand in solidarity and say what's important to us. And Brent started us with questions, but also, if we don't keep preservation, and if we're trying to destroy, it's like, what are we trying to forget about the history of Dallas and about this place? And I encourage us instead to think about what do we want to remember? What is so important and cherished to us today that we are willing to protect through our practices and policies where we live, where we spend our money, and how we collectively organize to continue to preserve them. That's what we're here for.
Thank you. And now, we would love to hear your questions for our panel. If you will just raise your hand. We have hands initiative, we have mics, and are going to walk around, and I see we have quite a few already, so. And if you could please go ahead and state your name and where you live. Thank you.
Greetings, how y'all doing this evening? Now, as a student of history here, I say that there's one route that is continuously overlooked across the metroplex, and that would be the southern route, and I call the North Texas Traction Heritage Trail, running from downtown Dallas here all the way down Jefferson Boulevard, across Grand Prairie, directly into Arlington, now which is the entertainment district, and Lancaster Boulevard right out to downtown Fort Worth. There is still one route, 32 miles long, 100 foot wide. That's a direct route connecting this metroplex. Now, the Heritage Trail alongside this has hundreds of historic properties, buildings, cemeteries. Basically, it's the foundation corridor of this metroplex. And I would urge, well, certainly that is transition of the first age of electrification going back to 1902 when the interurban started, and when she stopped 89 years ago. It happens, you know, we forget about it, but we still did it first. We need to remember that, embrace it, own it, and then get on it. That's all I got. Thank you all.
Thank you. Who has the mic next? All right, it's back here and then we'll go over here. And name, please, and where you live. Thank you.
Oi. First of all, my name is Albert Baquiela. I've got a question for City Manager Broadnax. But before I do, I'd be remiss if I didn't welcome everybody to my high school. So, Mr. Broadnax, Pike Park was the cultural heart of not only Little Mexico, but the Mexican American community here in Dallas. About 10 years ago, we had an exhibit. I was the president of the Dallas Mexican American Historic Group. We had an exhibit about Pike Park. We had a panel discussion. 3 of the city council people were on the panel, and we asked them, what are y'all gonna do about Pike Park? All 3 of them said, we're gonna preserve it. Well, you gotta preserve it because you can't knock it down, but it's really deteriorating. And so maybe y'all, the city putting the IT department in there has helped out. But my question is, in the bond program, is there any funds that can go into Pike Park? Because I reached out to John Jenkins, the park director, a year ago. I reached out to Jesse Moreno a few months ago. Somebody got to work on that building. And John Jenkins says that he wants to. Jesse Moreno wants to. But nobody's doing it. So I want to challenge you, Mr. Broadnax, do something with that building. Or tell us that you're going to do something with that building. All right? Some in our own community say, well, we can't do anything with it because there's no parking. Well, this isn't the 30s and 40s and 50s. You got to think about parking differently. I know that when we had some outdoor activities there 3, 4, 5 years ago, we went to Dave Brown with the American Airlines Center. They let us park in their parking lot, in their parking garages. It's just a matter of collaborating with the neighborhood. So, that's my challenge to you, Mr. Broadnax. What say you?
So thank you for the question. Just for the record, I've only been in the city for 7 years. And so I was not here to hear the promise and commitment. However, as you outlined the discussion around, it's really a parks issue. One of the reasons I was a little late today was because we were talking about the bond program. And so there, at this point stage, there was an amazing amount, $310 million proposed today for parks-related activities. Well, let's not get excited. That was today. That can always change 7 days from now. However, I say that to say there was some discussion today briefly about libraries and a commitment and a promise and a discussion about a library that was put in the bond program way back in the early 2000s that still has not been built. I think we've acquired land for it way, way back. And here we are in 2023, it's probably 2003 or 2006. 20 years later, we're talking about updating our library master plan. And that would be, if not funded this year in this bond program, that would be the only library that had not been finished in our strategic plan or library master plan. And so I would say to you, the conversation you should probably have in the very near future with the city council member of the district and the Parks Department is to talk about the opportunities that have been missed, the discussions that had occurred 10 years ago, in trying to figure out how to prioritize something that someone committed to you and your community 10 years ago to ensure it's still a viable and nice park should be prioritized before we go and build new things and move on, since this is a preservation conversation. And so I think you should probably bring that context into it. I know I will ask the staff in the Parks Department as well as share with the council member about that commitment. But again, one of our values in our city is integrity and ethics, and to me that means if we say we're going to do something, then we should do it. And so again, I appreciate you raising that today, and I support honoring commitments that we've made in the past. Thank you.
Given our time, I think we'll take one more question. We have one up front.
Hi, my name is Larry Johnson, and I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
My name is Larry Johnson. I'm with 10th Street, 1026 Veterans. I'm doing my address right. Okay. So this question is for Ms. Sims and Mr. Broadnax. I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Okay, thank you very much. I just have two really quick questions. The first question is African American historic preservation important and why? And then the second question is more so for Mr. Broadnax. How much money has been invested in 10th Street versus, say, the deck park that's going in right up the street from 10th Street? I mean, where your heart is, that's where your treasure is. And so how much money has been invested in 10th Street versus the deck park right up the street? But the first question is about African American historic preservation. Is it important to you and why?
Well, ladies first, Ms. Sims, you.
Watch this, I'm gonna defer my time back to you. But simply, of course, and that has to be shown in how we prioritize the city and considering that the African American community and other communities of color, right? Considering the Latino and the Asian American community, which I apologize, we've not spent a lot of time talking about, indigenous communities are super important as well. But to answer your question specifically about Black history and Freedman's towns, which the city has had a role in intentionally dismantling and making sure that they're almost not extinct except for through the stories that people tell. And so I think it's important that we allocate budgets and funding and storytelling and all the resources that we can, and we'll return my time to our city manager.
So first of all, I think the first question about is African American history or preservation.
Is it important to you and why?
Yes, it is. I think, obviously, I happen to be African American, but I understand, I think, the importance of all communities, but specifically communities where individuals in some cases have no choice but to live in some cases, based on, I think, just social factors. And I think for me, it's a special and a different perspective as well when I understand the history of Dallas and how it's developed and how we've approached race and disparities and the things that have impacted so many lives in our community. So it's important to me, no different than, and probably, because of who I am, and I am the city manager of the city, but also for other areas similarly situated. As it relates to the exact amount of resources that we put into 10th Street, I do know that there was a specific allocation, if we were allocating, by several council members last year that focused on, or if not the year before, specifically on Freedman's towns And I want to say specifically for the 10th Street area, it was probably about $2.5 million to $3 or $4 million dedicated specifically to that community. Now, the unfortunate part is there probably needs to be, as we have estimated, around the infrastructure sides of things beyond just the bricks and mortar of homes, probably 50 to 60 million more dollars invested in that immediate area around streets and others to actually improve the quality of life in that community. As far as the Southern Gateway project, one, they're asking for funds now, but I know the city has funded probably $7 million associated with TxDOT's project to improve and solidify the footers that would support a deck park when it is actually constructed. I know they're raising private funds for the bulk of it, but the city is committed to investing in that deck park, no different than we invested in Clybourne and others, because we think it will enhance the environment there. It's going to put pressure on, the gentrification issue, obviously. But I think it's a statement, and we're committed to finding ways to improve that area. The deck parks are part of that, I would say. So for me, I think we've got to be able to do both. But just to be honest and frank, the southern part of our city lacks billions and billions of dollars of infrastructure. And we can single out 10th Street, we can talk about Joppy and all the things that surround it. We can talk about Floral Farms. We can talk about a litany of other communities in our southern part of our city that are in the same predicament in some cases, maybe not a historic designated area of sorts, but are all suffering from the same plight, and that's the disinvestment. And that discussion we had a few years ago around redlining shined a light on that. And so again, I can sit here and apologize all day for what we haven't done. I would say my intentional and the council's intentional exercise over the last 4 years around repositioning our economic development policy and our incentives to be based on and predicated on equitable economic development, our comprehensive climate action plan and its goals surrounding all things that affect people's quality of life, anchored in equity and racial equity. Our cultural plan, which needs to be updated, also has a premise anchored in equity. Every plan, from the mobility plans to this preservation plan, will be undergirded by a sense of and a lens of equity. Now, do we have the resources to solve it? Even the bond program that I just mentioned to the gentleman a few minutes ago, we've got $18 billion worth of deferred maintenance and a list that long just to get at it. And we're talking about $1 billion of that. So there's going to be many, many more years of specific and targeted investment that I'd say even when we talked today, it was about, okay, well, what am I going to do with the economic development and housing dollars? The discussion was, when we begin to give those resources out, they need to be given out consistent with our new policies of where we want to see those dollars invested, and those are in underserved areas and equity priority areas that have been identified in our housing plan, in our economic development plan. So how we're approaching it now is targeted and specific around the things that you talk about. And those areas like 10th Street and others should be in line for if folk want to develop or we want to spend money on housing rehabilitation. Those areas should be front and center and be priority areas based on our policies and plans. So that's my response. And this young lady's hand, if it could go any higher, it would touch the ceiling. So
Yes,
I know we're running out of time. But
I was also told though that we want to make sure we give at least a couple of more people an opportunity to ask their questions. And yes, you've got your hand up. Let me have a mic over there.
Hi, my name is Eva Jones. I am the president of Queen City's Neighborhood Association. First of all, City Manager promised me that you were going to do. And that was work on what we need in the southern sector, and specifically Queen City, when we're talking about gentrification, houses, and permitting. That's my big concern. It's because we're having 2- and 2-story shotgun houses that have morphed off of streets that have been historically designated from a national register, but the city doesn't recognize it. What can we do as a community and a neighborhood? And we're fighting. I have voted for almost everybody that works in the historical department for the city because we're steady in contact. What can we do to do something about the design standards for the remaining residents that are in Queen City, again, a nationally historical destination?
So thank you for that. I think the first question I would have, and I'll defer to someone more intelligent than me, is does your community actually want to be a landmark designated thing? So, I think we'll make sure we get our staff that helps and assists neighborhoods who want to be landmark to get you started in the process to do that, and then it goes before our landmark committee that can get there. So again, I feel like we're in church and you just want to be a member, so thank you very much. So again, we start with, for your community, the landmark designation, and then we can have some guidance on those things. So I appreciate the comment. I think this young lady right
And
here.
I think, there we go, our last one.
Hi, I spoke earlier today. I am a performance artist. Sometimes I'm outside of the Bike Park, Santos Rodriguez Recreation Center, which I appreciate that it's been named that. I appreciate the statue. Why is it still closed? I stand there because my grandparents, I stand there dressed as my grandmother, doing acts of ritual, ancestral research because she died when I was young, and there's no one for me to go back to in that community to talk to about where my grandparents lived. It doesn't exist. I also want the people who are driving down Harry Hines to see me to know that my grandmother was there, because I'm counting beans or I'm braiding my hair. But what is really frustrating to me is there's this elite baseball field right next to Santos Rodriguez Recreation Center that is not available to the community. What is really frustrating to me is there's this $1 million golf course built below the Trinity River Audubon Center that no one in our community can afford. Those things seem to me to be done intentionally. Like you said, you mentioned what we haven't done. And I'm thinking about what you are doing. And so every time I'm at a bond meeting and people say we're going to help developers provide these homes, these affordable workforce homes, for rent, my mind goes to, that means they're going to get help to own the land, and we get to work forever and continue to pay them. If you're going to teach me how to fish, Are you still gonna make me buy the fishing pole, the bait? Not even have access to the land, the ponds in the southern sector because they're trophy, club, lack of access ponds. And then, so I can only fish in the poisoned waters, and then I have to, engage in the lack of medical industrial complex in my area. I'm concerned. And then let me not forget the selling of Pearl C. Anderson too.
Oh, gosh, well, that sounds nice, yes.
I won't even say their name, because I do have a faith practice and I don't acknowledge them as someone who follows the same one. It's just a travesty. And so how did that happen under y'all's watch? Like, how did that happen? How long ago was that? Was it in the last year or two at least? So if we've been talking about racial equity, how did that happen? How did the golf course happen? Why is the recreation center still not available? I'm just still confused. I mean, I see progress, but I don't see the money coming into the communities the way it does for other folks. And I know you're going to say that's private sector, but we are always talking about return on investment, and I'm wondering, we talked about culture and community connection. We know that there's an epidemic of loneliness in the world, but in our nation. And that we know these kinds of things help us be healthy, help us stay more connected, help us increase our wealth. But if we're not innovatively either, only we're going to just be renting. We're just going to be renting. We're going to help people buy houses, but they're not going to get to stay there long because they're going to get, squashed out by gentrification, displaced. How can we innovate and think about cooperative and collective ownership and think about the populations of people like the elderly, folks with cognitive disabilities? I'm someone with a cognitive disability, single parents, artists, students. How can we create housing like we see internationally? I sent y'all all the lists, if you're on the city council, and Mr. Broadnax, I sent you the list of all these other variations of ways to create community living spaces. And we're still not talking about it. I still don't hear it when we're talking about bond and housing. And I understand we have to stop the bleed because there's a housing issue, but if we don't invest in the beginning part of keeping people from becoming homeless and being creative about it, then it's just going to always be there. We're just always going to be stopping the bleed. So my question is, why are those three things happening so recently if we know that we have a racial equity plan? Why could the golf course happen? Why did Pearl C. Anderson get sold? And why is Santos Rodriguez? And you know what? In Pleasant Grove, they decided that that's my neighborhood, that they didn't want that street named after him. I think it should have been because the police need to be reminded down there because they are a mess. And I get why, maybe it should be up here, but why is the recreation center still in disrepair after so long?
So thank you for all of those comments. And so I'm not one to pass the buck a lot. But I would say, first of all, I can't speak to it. I don't know how old the golf course is. However, I think the repurposing of the golf course, it actually used to be a dump and was a place where it was really a reclamation and cleaning up of something and turning something that was bad into something that is better. I'm not a golfer, so I won't be an advocate for golf. I like Tiger Woods, but I'm not a golfer. And I get it when I heard the membership prices there. I had the same kind of reaction. One, because I'm not a golfer, but two, it was still a lot of money. So I can't speak to that, but it actually turned something that was bad into something good. As it relates to the school, I guess, that wasn't school she was talking about, right? Well, that's the ISD. And so we don't really have any influence over how they dispose of land. I will tell you, more recently, probably the last 5 months, I had a conversation with the ISD, similar to a conversation at the city with DART, and others, where I've said to them, when you want to dispose of a school, we would much rather you, since you're not development oriented, you're just a school. When you want to get rid of a school, let the city intervene and work with you, and we will be able, if you don't want to use it as a school, to figure out how we can encourage and get someone to come in and maybe adaptively reuse those schools and put them into a meaningful, public, and beneficial situation. They've actually agreed that that would be something they'd be willing to do, and asked us for an example of our arrangement with DART, that we've actually worked with them to say, hey, how can we turn some of your vacant properties around some of your transit facilities and or park and ride places into affordable housing and transit-oriented development to again get at some of those issues. We've heard loud and clear about this notion that we need to stop only looking in the South to do rental and multifamily development, and find a way to at least marry up with the city's overall mix of a 40-60 type of a split, and look at home ownership and wealth building opportunities in all parts of our community. So we've heard that loud and clear, and I hope that you'll see more of that coming forward in our city. The last part around the park and its condition and what hasn't been done, I'll just only say this once just for perspective. The Parks Department is separate and apart and not under the purview of the city manager. They're under the purview of a board that's appointed by council. They get to make those decisions and look at that as a system. However, I work very closely with the director who functions sort of like the city manager over parks, and I will raise that issue as my team is taking notes to talk to him about that, to see in fact what and why they haven't done anything, and then what is their plans and what are their plans for that recreation or that building that you raised today. So I appreciate the comments, and we're going to, again, this is all about us hearing these stories, which we don't even have this conversation around preservation enough, if not ever, that now we understand more, and as we evolve this strategic plan, some of the things that you raised here tonight, we may have a draft almost prepared. I think these conversations help inform that, so we at least know other areas that we need to put in there and actually put our hands together and start working on. So thank you for the comment. And this gentleman moved all the way up in front, I think, because he thinks we're going to ask him a question, but I'm going to defer to the host. I know people have time constraints and want to get out of here. I could be here almost all night. So.
All right. This is truly our final question, and then I think our panelists will be happy to stay to talk with others.
No speech, just question. So I'm very proud to be second-gen Filipino American, born down the road. Here's the question. Whenever I post a video, and I have, it gets a decent viewing, of me in Oak Cliff, for some reason, I will get DMs and comments saying, get out of Oak Cliff, gentrifier. And even if I'm not showing up in a flashy car, I'm not eating at some bougie restaurant, a lot of times I'm literally just taking public transportation and walking in the neighborhood, and then people will comment, get out of here, gentrifier, why are you raising the price of housing? And I couldn't figure out what it is about me. I'm not dressed fancy or anything. Something I noticed in every conversation about gentrification is that down to the neighborhood, and sometimes even down to the complex, I have a habit of asking everybody, all of my peers, where they're from, or where they live, and why they moved to Dallas. And all of them come for work or for school, but then their answer is often the apartments in like some of the ones that are named. So it's whether it's Sylvan or at Mission Arts, or maybe it's near the medical district that was previously Little Mexico. And so there's a lot I'm tempted to say without going into a speech. So my question is, for people who like me who come here to work or to study, to be doctors or teachers or nurses, and we fit the exact profile of moving into gentrifying neighborhoods, and we fit the profile of people who do not look like us, quote unquote. We're not black and we're not Mexican. We're very clearly Asian, and we very clearly fit the profile of not looking like us. Are we gentrifiers? And are we welcome in these neighborhoods? And is the history that we are writing every day part of the conversation about the history we want to preserve in our communities? That's my question.
So, since nobody, first of all, thank you for those comments. Let me say this. The purpose of this conversation, the setting of the table for the ideas that are germinating from these conversations, the premise is we want to understand and appreciate everyone in this community's story, their perspective, their culture, if there is some indelible way that is shown up in this community. And so I would say to you, I don't know who is in your following group and who DMs you.
I don't want to point anyone out, but like there's people who living in the apartments that you're talking about in this room. Not gonna.
Again, that's fine. My point is, we want to hear all those perspectives, and this plan and how we preserve and what we do, I think impacts everyone. And again, your own story is your own story, and I'm sure, you know, if my parents were still alive, what they wanted for me often was different than what they had and where we live. And the advancements in the conversations typically were, and it's probably a living room table conversation was, what I want for you is what, and your struggles do not be what mine were. I want you to go to college, go to school, get a good job, and in some cases, don't end up where I'm at and move somewhere else, which obviously in some cases meant it was in a different socioeconomic place than where you had been the last 18 years, right? And so my parents never said, hey, I want you to live in the same neighborhood and have $15,000 annually for your income and raise a family of 4 on that, because that's what I want for you. No! Did I ever think I'd be the city manager of Dallas? Yes. Well, that's a true story, but yes. But the reality is, my history allows for me to appreciate and understand where everybody is, because I didn't become the city manager overnight. And so when we have these conversations that you feel folks feel differently about where you may live in an apartment that may cost more than their home or apartment, the issue is those very same people at some point probably lived in a similar apartment that was less expensive, never and hadn't owned their home, but now they may have one, and now they're feeling the pressure of something that is built 40 years later that is much more expensive, that is just nature and just life. And I think those are the counterbalancing discussions that I think generationally, and just in perspective, that I think people lose sight of because we're so focused on us and our current situation and not understanding we once were everybody that we were talking about. Can you imagine at 18, at least I can't even remember that far back, if someone said to me, my first apartment cost me $350 a month, right out of college, and I was whining about that. So imagine $1,000 or $2,000 a month. That is a lot of pressure on people. So again, these are all things that come into why we're having this conversation about preservation and keeping what you have, I guess, in a livable condition. And I spend time in Queen City, and I've seen reconstructions that the city has worked with for elderly people in that community that are in scale and look like the homes next to them. They just happen to be newer. And so again, I think we can do a multitude of things, but we don't have to demonize each other to find ways to get there and step over other people's dreams when they're just in the beginning of trying to figure out how to get where you are and where you evolve from. So again, I think it's a bigger conversation. I appreciate you sharing that, but that's why we're here today. Everybody's story is important. And you know, I mean, I hear so many stories from my own staff about Little Mexico and the little building that in the complex that the Housing Authority owns, and the fear that at some point, at some time, since you got $2 million and now $25 million condos right up the street, what's going to happen to that in 10 or 15 years, right? And so again, we've got to keep our eye on the things that matter to us. And I think being in this room, showing up tonight, being away from your families, shows that this is important to you. And when we began to share and ask for your input and feedback on this strategic plan, it's not going to cure things overnight, but help us take the next step. We get some creative people on board with us to partner with us as a city organization. We're all going to be better and be in this fight together. And that's what tonight is about. And I think your stories tonight, sharing, keep getting in rooms and spaces and talking about things that matter to you. Because if they matter to you, they've got to matter to us. Because that's what we're here for. We're here for you. That's what our jobs are, is to help you in this community and meet the needs that you expect us to meet for you. And so again, we're partners. We may not have always been good partners. I will own that, even if I don't know it specifically. But we're here tonight. And my history, if you don't know me, is that I'm a collaborator and I listen and I truly honor and respect people. And if there's a way to get it done, I'm always going to try to get it done. And if I don't believe it needs to be done, I'm going to tell you to your face in that moment that it's not something I would support, but you may talk to somebody else that can help you, because it may not be something I do. I'm always going to be square, and I think our council members are going to be square with you. And back to that question of something 10 years ago, it reminds me of the 20-year discussion that I just brought up today. And so, again, we need to honor our commitments, and we need to really honor the history and the cultures and the stories. And that's why, again, we're trying to do something different with our preservation program. So thank y'all for being here tonight.
Thank our panel. Sylvia, thank you for moderating. As Sylvia said, they'll be here for other questions afterwards. Shifting from the city manager's role, we have two council members with us this evening, of which we're very, very proud to have Mayor Pro Tem Atkins, who represents District 8, who's also the chairman of the Economic Development Committee Council, as well as many other responsibilities. I'd ask if you would come forward and make a few remarks, and then following that, we have our Councilmember Schultz, who represents District 11, who's the chair of the Workforce Education and Equity Committee, as well as many other things. Both of these leaders have been at the forefront of pushing equity as a part of policy and supporting that and advancing that across our entire city. And so with that, Councilmember Atkins, thank you.
First, let's get on about the blessing to be here. This kind of reminds me here of gentrification right here in Uptown. This was all a black neighborhood. And I just lived here, went to school at St. Peter's Academy, and Notre Dame. So I am a process of gentrification. I also went to Judith Street Fraser High School, Fancy Harry, and Charles Rice, which was all white school. But that's in gentrification South Dallas. So I'm here to say welcome you here, but with my colleague, Chairman Schultz, we're here to make a policy to make sure we do not forget preservation. We are 100% here. They call me the elder because I know the history of Dallas. I've been in Dallas all my life. But preservation is a key. It's a key to claim your neighborhood, claim your heritage. But we cannot do it without you. But we also can't blame the past. We gotta look at today. There are different things we need to do. The bond patch today. That's why that's why the city manager was late. That's why I was late getting here. We were talking about the bond. We were talking about how much money can we put in the bond patch to make sure. Preservation is very expensive. Number one, what he said earlier, sometimes when you try to do a historic work on a house, they think, oh, it's too much. I'm gonna lose my house. Who gonna work on the house? Are they qualified? Are they learning? Are they doing the right process and procedure? But I was here to listen to everything, to get everything here. But we are going to have many occasions in the City Hall that I hope everybody signed up and we got the email address. So Councilwoman Schultz and myself in March, We are going to talk about preservation. We are talking about putting policy in place. So as long as you're here to listen, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming and waiting so late tonight to listen to me.
Thank you. So I just prepared a few things, and I want to start off by saying thank you so much. Thank you, Brent, for the welcome to us. I want to give a huge thanks to Brent and all the incredible panelists, Preservation Dallas, Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, and the HRNA team for putting on a fantastic program. As you heard, I'm Jamie Schultz. I represent District 11 and I chair the Workforce Education and Equity Committee. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Your insights, passion, and dedication to our city are not just commendable, they are the fuel that drive us, the city's leaders, for a better future. Tonight we're reminded of the importance of historic preservation in the tapestry of our city's narrative. Preservation is not just about maintaining buildings, it's about honoring the stories, struggles, and triumphs that have shaped Dallas into the vibrant, diverse metropolis that it is today. The Racial Equity Plan of 2022, the Equitable Economic Development Policy of 2023, and our Climate Action Plan have laid the groundwork for this work. These initiatives aim to eliminate disparities, foster full participation in cultural and civic life, and bridge the racial wealth gap. But how do these priorities translate to historic preservation? Our goal is to ensure that every community in Dallas, from our oldest to our newest, has its history and culture recognized and preserved as the city evolves. This is not just a matter of preserving buildings, but of conserving the stories, the art, and even the trees as the very soul of these communities. It's about giving voice to the unheard and visibility to the unseen. As Dallas continues to grow, it's imperative to acknowledge the multifaceted importance of preserving our history amidst development. A crucial part of this tapestry is the often forgotten history of African Americans and their significant contributions across Dallas. In North Dallas, we have a rich history of freedmen's towns, wealthy black areas, and entire communities that are African American. Some of the historic sites in my district include the White Rock Cemetery, the oldest African American burial ground in the area dating back to 1845, which will be presented for landmark designation on February 5th. Yeah, come to the heritage for the very fun. Anderson Bonner Park, a park that was named after Anderson Bonner, and the location of his homestead, where it was estimated that he had amassed over 2,000 acres of land after emancipation, more than any African American in Dallas County. Mount Pisgah Baptist Church, the oldest African American church in Dallas County, which was founded in 1864 by the people of the Alpha Road community. We also have many mid-century modern homes that desperately need protection. Now, with the Historic Preservation Plan in motion, the city will allocate resources to ensure that such measures are taken. Recognizing this, my office is proud to announce an initiative dedicated to preserving and celebrating this vital part of our history by partnering with Remembering Black Dallas. We are hosting a Black History of North Dallas celebration in our district office on February 18th from 2 to 4 p.m. This event will feature an exhibit highlighting the prominent landmarks and individuals from that era, commemorating and bringing to light this forgotten yet integral part of our history. It's part of the reason I fight so hard for 10th Street, so that it's not forgotten the way so much of North Dallas, the African American history of North Dallas, has been forgotten. So please mark your calendars and join us. And also, we're looking for more artifacts. If you know of any, so please let me know about that. Furthermore, the educational value of our historic sites cannot be overstated. They are living classrooms that honor invaluable lessons about our city's journey. This preservation fosters a sense of community pride and community, especially as we heard in Guadalajara and other areas. A reminder of where we've come from and we look forward to the future. To achieve this, we need those tools and properly allocated resources. We must leverage technology, engage in community-driven planning, and secure funding to safeguard our heritage. It's much more than just conservation. It's about integration and celebration of our diverse histories in the fabric of our city's growth. That's what the city's Historic and Cultural Preservation Plan is working for. In closing, I just want to express my gratitude to our hosts and everyone who contributed to such a successful event tonight, and to everyone who's taken part in the initiative of historic and cultural preservation in Dallas. Your commitment to our community's past, present, and future is commendable. Remember, we're all custodians of Dallas's rich history. Together, we are tasked with the responsibility of building a Dallas that not only remembers its past, but embraces it as a cornerstone for our prosperous and inclusive future. As we chart this path forward, let us ask ourselves, what does Dallas's identity mean to each of us? How do we preserve the essence of what makes Dallas special? Your reflections today are crucial in this journey. They drive our policies and our decisions, ensuring that our collective vision for Dallas's identity is realized. Together, let's build a vibrant Dallas that remembers, respects, and rejoices in its past as it boldly strides into the future. So thank you all for being a part of this journey with me.
Thank you, Councilmember Schultz. Councilmember Atkins, thank you for that. I'd like to invite our hosts up now. Jerry Hawkins, please come forward. Victoria Cloud, work with you, please. We need to remind ourselves of sort of focusing, on what the city can do. And I think T.C. said this, the city needs partners. And our hosts tonight represent two significant partners in our city to help us work to be inclusive in our city of the future. And there are many others. So with that, Victoria.
Thank you very much. My name is Victoria Clow. I'm president of Preservation Dallas. Historic preservation is most effective when it serves a higher purpose. Preservation is crucial for sustainability, fostering economic development, and revitalization of places with distinct identities for its residents. It fosters a sense of place and belonging. Historic age buildings are home to many small businesses, including minority-owned businesses, and are a significant component of affordable housing. Today, we're discussing this context of recognizing and appreciating our city's diversity and cultural heritage. Years ago, I attended a cemetery tour by students at Travis Academy Magnet School in Uptown. The tour took us to the different historic cemeteries at Lemon and Central Expressway. The students stood there at their assigned grave marker and recounted the history of the individual's life they were just talking about. The students seemed genuinely inspired by the Dallas history they learned, gaining an appreciation for our past and the opportunity to witness this representation. Our students and community deserve the opportunity to witness the rehabilitation and the representation of the past in the built environment within the place and neighborhoods that mirror our diverse heritage. We must prioritize historic preservation as essential for low-income housing, for diversity, housing small businesses, and recognizing our community's diversity. We can't let it be lost when the city's coffers are low, or when people think the development will provide a quicker economic gain. Historic preservation can be part of the solution, especially in challenging times, and it can serve those many higher purposes. It must reflect our vibrant cultures and our roots. I want our young people to experience Dallas history in a way that goes beyond simply visiting the final resting places of our ancestors. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to H&R, and the panelists. It's really great to see a panel with mostly women. Really great to see that in Dallas. That's really important. My name is Jerry Hawkins. I'm the Executive Director of Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. Our mission is to create a radically inclusive Dallas and Fort Worth by talking and engaging in the concepts of race and racism through the TRHT framework, which includes narrative change, relationship building, and equitable policies and practices. The first thing, I just really have some charges for us. The first thing is our charge is to, it's a bigger, wider project. And that's, we have to actually build a collective memory of what we have done, what we've been through, and where we are in Dallas. When I say collective memory, TRHT works come from TRCs, or Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. And that goal happened in 40 plus countries after civil war, ethnic conflict. And what these countries do is, when those things happen, you actually have to start again. And you start again by saying that these things happen, and we're going to make sure every resident knows that these things happen, right? If you've ever been to Germany, you know that you're not going to encounter the Holocaust if you walk 4 or 5 steps, right? If you've been to South Africa, you're going to hear about the apartheid that happened, right? We actually have to do that in Dallas. We have to mark this territory saying that indigenous people were here, right? I served on the Dallas County Historical Commission. There are very few markers that mention that Native people even existed here, right? And if they did, it's a very racist marker, right? So we have a lot of work to do. We have to build a collective memory of what happened. Next, if you are from a different community and you see what's happening in another community, you actually have to fight for that other community because they, in turn, are going to fight for you. I'll give you an example. Somebody mentioned the Santos Rodriguez Recreational Center. Well, that happened because a group of us, and I'm saying a lot of people, actually protested and we renamed Hyde Park Santos Rodriguez Park. But that also happened because the city of Seattle actually recognized our history before Dallas did, right? The city of Seattle created a Santos Rodriguez Park in the city of Seattle, right? And so it's really important that we don't take our history for granted. Our history is being talked about every day in other places except for here. So I just went to Barnes & Nobles. I go there 3 or 4 times a year now because we have half-price books here, which is a great additive to our city. Every community has book infrastructure, which is great, right? But I ran into this book. This is called Sleeping with the Ancestors, How I Follow the Footprints of Slavery. And it's by Joseph McGill Jr. Right? In this book, he talks about Old City Park. And many of you are familiar with Old City Park. But in here, he talks about the Slave Dwelling Project. It's a project that came to Old City Park when it was Dallas Heritage Village. And Dallas TRHT sponsored with Old City Park the Slave Dwelling Project to come. And Joseph McGill actually sleeps in these slave dwellings, right, which is the Millermore Mansion and the Millermore Cabin, with people, and then brings his staff to humanize the stories of the enslaved. Well, he's talking about Dallas in this new book. Do we know that, right? Do we know that other people are talking about our history without us, right? And so all of us have to be part of this project and take our work seriously. Lastly, we have to collaborate. I really want to, thank the city for being here. My partner Amber, this is something we've been fighting for a long time in the city, is collaboration with the city, collaboration with other organizations. I want to thank Preservation Dallas for partnering with Dallas Asian American Historical Society, right? We need more collaboration. Thank you, KARA. We are now working on a documentary series about the history of race and racism in Dallas. I'm excited for what's going to come. Thank you for being patient with us too. We're a small but mighty organization. And I want you all to notice and support the people who are doing cultural and historic preservation right now. I want to mention again Miss Wesson, the White Rock Chapel Church. They need your support. I'm talking about just verbal support, a letter of support, right? Elizabeth Watley Forest Forward, they're preserving the Forest Theater right now. You know, there are people who are doing this work right now who need your support. So thank you all, and again, you're a part of history.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Victoria. Very quickly, thank you again to the panel, Sylvia, for your moderation. I want to thank my co-chair for the strategic plan, Amber Sims, and any of our advisory committee members that are here to please stand quickly. Victoria, stand up. We've got a great group that are both from the professional community related to historic preservation, as well as from neighborhoods. Another item, just quickly, because we talk a lot about what the city needs to do, does, doesn't do, and with the exception of our city manager, we have other city staff here, and we need to thank them more because they are working very, very hard. I believe I saw Kate also, who is our preservation program director. Kate, please stand up. So, and I think I saw Arturo, stand up, Arturo. And any other city staff, please stand up. A lot of people, a lot of demands, and thank you for your service and your commitment to the public good. So with that, Amber, would you like to make a closing remark?
Thank you all again for being here. As Brent said, we'll be unveiling TBD, so don't ask us about dates, JK, about the draft. But it's really important, right, and excited about this energy that's here tonight, that we go and talk about the work, that we go to city council and to the budget meetings and advocate and show up. Things happen and things change. I was involved about 10 years ago when we were fighting for Fair Park against the privatization, what that process would look like. And that process changed, as many processes have, because people showed up. And then to bring into this room, as we celebrate Black History Month right? Bring into this space the name of Amy McKnight, who was a tireless advocate for the preservation of what we now know as Freedman Cemetery and other histories that are here. And so just, in terms of a call to action, this is long-term work. Okay, so tag some other people in so that we can continue the work. And thank you again to my co-chair and to all the HR staff. And her amazing